This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
I'm pleased to welcome you to this special program, Women to Women on Welfare Reform. My name is Frances Deegan Horowitz, and I'm president of the Graduate School and University Center of the City University of New York. Among the most pressing issues our nation is facing now is how we ensure that every child in this country has the opportunity to develop into a productive and contributing citizen. How every adult in this country has the opportunity for gainful employment that sustains families and has meaningful access to health care. Unfortunately, our society has not yet achieved these opportunities for all of its citizens, making it important for there to be available a good safety net to help people over rough times, to protect the developmental opportunities for children, and to enable families to have sustaining incomes. Welfare systems are supposed to be designed to do these things. Yet there is now great dissatisfaction with what many perceive as the failure of our present welfare system. Thus, the popular refrain, "We must end welfare as we know it." Behind this refrain are many assumptions: that welfare is bad for the economy, that welfare throws budgets out of balance, that welfare is bad for those who are on welfare, largely women, and largely women with children. Women and work and children are inseparable issues. We cannot talk about welfare without asking what is good for children, what contributes most to helping women to have productive lives. We know that commitment to children and commitment to work are problems even for the most affluent of our society. These problems are of equal or perhaps even greater gravity for the least affluent of our families and for women in our society. We know that caring for and educating our children are matters of grave importance for our society, and yet the race to end welfare as we know it seems to have generated a consensus that ignores the need for serious discussions of the implications of proposals for children and for those who will be affected. These are issues that must be scrutinized and subjected to serious public debate if what we're planning to do in welfare reform is going to make things really better. And this serious public debate must include the voices of those affected by welfare policies as well as the voices of experts. Here at the Graduate School and University Center of the City University of New York, we're committed to trying to bring together all the voices that have something of importance to say, voices that can engage the issue seriously and with compassion. It is for this reason that a number of the faculty of the Graduate School and University Center, in cooperation with the City University of New York TV, decided to initiate a symposium series that would bring together women whose voices have not always been heard talking together, researchers, advocates, and the women who are themselves involved in the welfare system, to discuss, to debate, to explore the issues and the options for improving welfare, for creating safety nets for those who need it, for safeguarding our children's futures, and in doing so, our own futures. It is our hope that this symposium series will be informative, that it will contribute to our ability as a society to give serious consideration to recommendations to improve our welfare system, recommendations that are fair, that are humane, and that will not so much end welfare as we know it, but make the welfare system a meaningful and constructive part of comprehensive social policies designed to foster the development of all our citizens.
Joining us today are CUNY faculty, experts on the subject of welfare. Mimi Abramovitz from the Hunter College School of Social Work, CUNY. Marilyn Gittell teaches political science at CUNY's Graduate School. Barbara Amelad, once on welfare, is a researcher at the Center for Worker Education at the City College, CUNY. Frances Fox Piven teaches political science at CUNY's Graduate School. And Doris Correo Capello from the Lehman College CUNY Seek program. 5 women who have dedicated their professional lives to the advocacy of underrepresented women. Una Clark, a member of the City Council, 40th District in Brooklyn. Martha Davis, staff attorney of the now Legal Defense and Education Fund. Eleanor Guggenheimer, president of the New York Women's Agenda. Nina Perales, associate counsel, Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. And Vicki Golson, community organizer in North Harlem. Our third group is made up of women most directly affected by the existing welfare system and often the target of cruel and unfair charges. These women presently receive public assistance. They have children and are in college. Each turn to welfare for different reasons. Let's meet Doreen Harrigan, a student at Bronx Community College, CUNY, with a 3.9 grade point average. She has 2 children and receives public assistance. Zena Carica is a welfare recipient in New Jersey and a student at Middlesex Community College. Annette Sanchez attends Middlesex Community College and is on public assistance in New Jersey. Annette wants to be a lawyer. And Andrea Harris, a student at LaGuardia Community College, CUNY, currently on public assistance. Andrea hopes to become a social worker. Leading our discussion is Barbara Ehrenreich.
We're doing something unusual here today. We're having a discussion of welfare reform, and we're having this discussion entirely among women. That's unusual because the whole debate about national welfare reform of some sort has gone on a very abstract level so far, very far from the realities of child care, of balancing children and work, of poverty, of trying to get along as a single mother. We have a group here today. We have some faculty and researchers from the City University of New York. We also have a group of the real experts who are women who are now receiving public assistance, who are single mothers and happen to be college students today. And we have leaders of women's organizations and advocacy groups. We know the questions. President Clinton has said he would like to end welfare as we know it. We're going to ask whether that's a good aim or not, whether that would help people, poor women on welfare, poor women raising children on their own, or not. We're going to ask if that is the aim, how would anybody go about it? What should be the emphasis? Should the emphasis be on jobs? Should the emphasis be on changing the family structure in some way? Or should the emphasis be on changing the psychology, perhaps, of the welfare recipients? I'd like to start asking Professor Mimi Abramowitz a question about, well, a question I guess that occurs to a lot of taxpayers, because we're always told welfare is very, very expensive. Welfare is a big part of the budget. And we're told that a growing number of people are on welfare all the time. Mimi, can you tell us something about the scope of the problem, as it's called, in terms of numbers and people?
Well, most people think that the welfare rolls have been expanding forever and ever. But in fact, they have not been. Between the 70s and early 80s, they stabilized at about 10 or 11 million people. They have increased to almost 15 million people nationwide. Today, since 1989, due to the recession, when the economy goes down, the welfare rolls go up, the unemployment rolls go up, and so on. So that's very much expected. And the welfare rolls ebb and flow with changes in the population. When the population gets bigger, the welfare rolls get bigger with changes in policy and with changes in the economy. So we have about just under 15 million people on welfare today. Now, what's important to realize about that counts all the welfare, all the people on welfare. 2/3 of those people are children. So we have 5 million, just under 5 million adults, most of whom are women who are mothers, single mothers raising their children. So that, in terms of the size, those are the figures today. In terms of the cost, the program costs about $24–25 billion a year. Now, that represents 1% of the federal budget. So there's a big fuss being made about welfare and that it's bringing down the economy, that it's causing the deficit, but it represents just 1% of the federal budget and about 2% on the average of the state budgets. So it's really peanuts, small potatoes, compared to some of our other expenditures, such as interest on the debt, military expenditures, and so on. And yet, it's one of the mythologies that's being used to sort of fuel very punitive welfare reforms is that the size of the program and its costs are responsible for the sagging economy.
Well, that's an important point you're making, that mostly we're really talking about children then when we talk about welfare reform.
Absolutely.
But all the emphasis is on the adults, particularly on the mothers. Now, Francis, President Clinton is saying he wants everybody on welfare to get off in 2 years, get a job of some sort. Is this possible? Is this feasible? I mean, is this going to be a viable solution?
Well, it's an insane proposal because it assumes that there's a need in the labor market for the work, the wage work of these women. In fact, unemployment has been rising each decade. Average unemployment has gone from a little over 4% in the 1950s to over 7% in the 1980s. And now, even when the economy is presumably picking up, we still have relatively high unemployment, with the consequence that even people with college degrees, I'm sorry to say this, but it doesn't look so great out there, even engineers are searching for jobs as office temps. We have college graduates working as street peddlers. I mean, it's a bad job situation. And so why do we want to take women who are raising children, they're doing something useful, they're already working. You know, this is terribly demeaning of what women have always done and their traditional work. Maybe women should have more opportunities than tradition decreed, but that doesn't mean we have to insult the traditional work of raising children and protecting children in poor neighborhoods that have very bad services, in which children are often endangered. That's work. So here's a proposal to rip these women away from this traditional work, which is useful work that the society desperately needs to have done, and force them into a labor market where, at best, they're going to displace somebody else because there aren't enough jobs, so that somebody else will end up on unemployment insurance or on welfare. It's difficult to avoid the conclusion that it's all a kind of charade, a kind of political spectacle that they're acting out at the expense of women on welfare, that they're pandering to the worst features of American popular culture by pointing to women on welfare, which means, of course, in the popular mind, minority women who are raising children, and saying that they're to blame for everything that's wrong in this country.
Doris, you want to add to that?
I just wanted to add, this morning's news said that Grumman is firing 19,000 workers. And I think we're forcing women to move into the labor force, in a labor force that's really shrinking. There are fewer and fewer jobs out there. And yet we're forcing women who may not have all the skills to secure jobs out there. We're throwing them into this pool of people who have been displaced.
Well, some people would listen to you, Francis, and to you, Doris, and say, hey, you're really defeatists. You're saying there aren't jobs out there anyway, or that their jobs don't pay enough, and that's why the government, the taxpayers, have to subsidize people to stay home with their families. I'd like a response to that. Is that
There's
what we're up
nothing
against?
wrong with subsidizing people who are raising children. Every other rich society does it at a much higher level than the United States. The United States is way out in right field. It is so stingy in the kinds of supports that it provides women raising children by themselves. And the consequence is that life on welfare is as hard as we can hear these people on public assistance describe it to be. We should make it easier to raise children, not tougher.
And
Well,
then,
let me just ask some of the women who are here who are single mothers raising children with some help from public assistance now. Is what you get on welfare benefits, is that enough to enable you to stay home and raise children in the way that that Francis has been talking about? Doreen?
No, you have to have other resources. My mother helps me, church organizations, maybe a grandfather, you know how the grandfather types, every time they see you, they want to give you $5 or $10. But they don't realize when they give you those $5 or $10, that may be $5 for an extra meal for you and your children. You know, so you have other resources. You cannot live off of welfare alone. It's impossible.
Andrea, do you want to add anything to that?
As she said, and as I've, before spoken about, the support system that is needed for a single parent does not come out of welfare. It doesn't even come. Your eligibility specialist who you go to for your face-to-face, you're nobody to her. You're just a person that she has to see and do the paperwork in order for her to keep a job. She won't give you any kind of insight on where you could get some canned goods or where you could get some used articles, clothing or something for your children. They don't tell you those things. You learn this from the religious leaders, religious organizations, just plain organizations that are within your neighborhood. And then like with myself, my mother. My children go to my mother for most of the things that they need. She do this for me because of the fact that I juggle the bills and I don't ask her for anything at all. So she knows that I'm doing the best I can off of that small amount of money. So she gives me that support.
So we're talking really about, I mean, I'm putting this naively, we're talking about some, about really some very limited options. You're saying, we're hearing that there aren't enough jobs and they don't pay enough, and we're also hearing that welfare itself is not an answer as it is presently constituted. Now, Oni, you have experience, you know a lot about welfare to work programs.
Yes, I was just about to say, when you think of the feminization of poverty among women, because even when women work, they make 65 cents to $1 that a male makes. So again, that is saying or sending a signal to a woman that you are not worth as much as a man, even when you're doing the same job. And to think that you're coming out of a recession or still in a recession where there are no jobs. So I think that enforcing women to go out and work or make work, it's counterproductive. I think that, first of all, there are not enough childcare for them, even if they go out to work. So if a parent is in training, you must be able to provide them childcare, and there is not enough out there. So I just think that we're making words as politicians and as elected officials. We want our constituencies to feel that we're doing something when we can do nothing about the situation we find ourselves in.
Well, Ellie, you know, your group, Women's Agenda, has done a lot on the issue of child care. What about Clinton's welfare reform proposal, as much as we know that? Is it going to have adequate child care so that women will be able to move smoothly?
No, and you don't want to segregate child care and make child care for families on welfare. Child care should be universal in this country, and should have been for a long time. But I'd like to say a word in favor of welfare. I don't like welfare the way it is administered, and there's lots that's wrong, and I would like to see reform. But I lived in an era when there was no welfare, in the 20s and the 30s. I grew up during the 20s, and I remember the 30s very well, because there was a period, and that was a depression, when well-meaning women were running up and down on a block drive trying desperately to get some money together so that they could send it up into poverty areas, because people were starving and children were in deep, deep trouble. And the most wonderful thing that happened in my lifetime was that we got public assistance. I thank Eleanor Roosevelt for that, because I was sure that she was the one that convinced Franklin D. Roosevelt to put it in. Without it, we had no way of ensuring that there wasn't real starvation, real hunger, real suffering. That doesn't mean we don't need reform, because there isn't anything that's utterly perfect about any branch of government that I've been able to witness during my lifetime. I think everything needs some reform, and we need reform desperately, but not cut off. I mean, you get a cut off in 2 years, you may have a baby who's 1 year old. And I strongly believe, and I've worked in child care all my life, worked with women's organizations all my life, I strongly believe we must make it possible for women to stay at home if they choose to, and to live comfortably and with a decent standard of living. That's important for your children. That's important for the future of this country.
Now, Clinton is not proposing that there be universal child care that would also happen to be available to women who are currently receiving public assistance, is he? That's what you want.
Yes, of
He's
course.
not proposing that,
No,
right?
he's proposing, well, one of the things that has been on the table is Head Start. Head Start is fine. Everybody's very happy that children are getting educated. Children should be educated in daycare. Education should be part of any program in which you have children, because development in young children is so dramatic, it's so extraordinary. What they learn even in the first year is so extraordinary. Of course you need education, but a half-day program is absurd in this country today. The bulk of the extraordinary increase in the number of women working who are between 24 and 50 was documented recently by the Department of Labor. And that's perhaps the single most dramatic change in our entire labor force, or really in this country. And
then
that's
yet
the
there's-
nurturing.
There's
That's-
no policy that's keeping
No,
up with
and
that. Vicki, you're a community activist in Harlem. How do you see this?
The nurturance is key, because if when we talk about reform, when we talk about analysis, when we put ourselves back into the picture, we have to look at what has happened generation after generation, and we have to be strong enough, brave enough, and courageous enough to say somewhere in that mix we made a mistake. And we can truly look at when we took ourselves out of the nurturing formula, and when we began to allow programs to systematically deny us inclusion and the nurturing of our young, that is one of the most pivotal errors that we made. So during the 60s, coming out of the 50s into the 60s, it was resented in African families, African American families, for the woman to work. The male in the family was insulted if both adults had to go out to work. That phenomena of everybody leaving the house, and then the kids had to begin to raise themselves, and then special programs were developed to reward the acting out of young people, to reward the worst in us as human beings, as opposed to encouraging and turning systems and assistance. And welfare is really a safety net. You know, it is not the end of all. So we have to begin to clearly speak about what we have witnessed in our lifetimes, and to then supplement that eyewitness report with research and statistics, and then to sit people down and explain to them, you know, passionately, that you cannot continue to build the anxieties and the fears. You can't work on the fears and the anxieties of a population. You cannot be responsible and take it upon yourself to make the two most vulnerable components of a society your scapegoat, and that's women and children. Women and children have to be demonstrated publicly that you can take care of them. We must do that in order to have the sanity and the presence of mind to move forward. We have to stop telling our kids that you're going to school to get a better job. An African American family, I'm saying, you have to go to school to be a better slave. You go to school for a better quality of life. A woman goes to school because what she takes in during her pregnancy through osmosis is delivered to her child. If a woman is pregnant and carrying her child and her anxiety level is here, if she is frenzied, if she is made to feel less than the woman she is, if she is made to feel that that is a dark cloud coming forward as opposed to a breath of fresh air, a joy, a delight, then we are perpetuating a psychological
But there are people and I'm thinking of a lot of the male pundits who've become the big experts on welfare, who say that the best thing we could do for the self-esteem of poor women in this country is abolish welfare. I could practically quote this. Now, what you're saying, what Ellie's saying, is that there won't be enough child care anyway. So I'd like to just throw this right now to some of you who have direct experience with this. What happens if there's a cutoff after 2 years? What's going to happen to children if a Clinton-type plan goes through? And what is this going to look like in our country? Zena?
Our children are going to starve.
You mean, you want to, from your own experience, you think this is what you can extrapolate to?
I live in a facility where there's 27 women and children, and we find it difficult at the end of the month with food stamps. We struggle. We all come together and we have dinner so we can make ends meet. And if he's talking about cutting and whatever he's going to do with this welfare reform, the women and the children, like you were saying, are going to starve.
So that's not so surprising if people realize that the combination of food stamps and the AFDC benefits together don't lift a single family above poverty in any state in our country. So it's not surprising that it's so hard to make ends meet.
This is in, excuse me.
Annette, you on this subject?
First of all, when you have made a comment, I think about experts of the men who are making, what are they an expert of? Because they've never been on welfare. They're not raising the children because they're out there trying to make the bucks. and they never been poor. So what are they an expert of? I mean, how can they understand what we're going through? And one of the problems about welfare is that they're so busy trying to punish and control the women, they're forgetting about the children. If you punish me, if you cut this, if you try to force me to go work, who's gonna take care of my 4-year-old, my 3-year-old, my 2-year-old? They're gonna raise themselves, and then if I neglect that, I'm a bad mother again. So then there comes another blame that I'm not being there for my children. So I don't understand why is there so much focus on women that are on everything that's going on. Why is it that everything that goes on is our problem? You know, it's our fault. I mean, I go in and I'll spend a food stamp on a candy. Oh, you know, you're not spending it right. You know, everything is our fault. But we're not the ones who are making the policies. We're not the ones who are doing the budget. We're not the ones that's spending the budget. So then why is it our fault? Is that I don't think that they're man enough to look at themselves and see that they're the ones that are the problem.
Too bad they're not here right now.
and they don't want to be here because they're not man enough to face any of us and to hear what's really going on. They want to be in cloud nine. They want to be able to write down the policies, what they think is right. And obviously, all these years, if there's still a problem with welfare, if there's still people that don't have jobs, it's because obviously they're doing something wrong. You know, I don't think that they can make the connection.
Let's go back to the job issue just for a minute more. There's been a lot of fuss in the media about a program called America Works, which is supposed to take women who are now receiving public assistance and find them jobs, find them good jobs, and take care of the problem that way. Frances, have you done any research on America Works?
I have done research on America Works, and it's received a lot of attention on TV news shows. You know, everybody likes to show this private enterprise company that makes contracts with state governments, and they send their recruiters out to rustle up jobs for welfare recipients, and then lo and behold, on the TV screen we see a former welfare recipient saying she's very happy and her children are very happy. Now she is working. But if you look behind all of this, it turns out that the group that's happiest of all is America Works. Because America Works makes many thousands of $5,000 from the state government, another $1,000 from the feds. Then they skim off the wages that the women get in their new jobs, so they're very happy, and they get hardly any. It's a minuscule program, and then you have to ask, well, what happens to the people who otherwise would have gotten that job? Because they don't increase the number of jobs. There's just that one job. Now they got it for a welfare recipient. That's very nice. But the person who otherwise would have gotten that job, what happens to them? Well, they end up on welfare, I assume.
We see, Doris.
I just want to share a conversation I had with someone. I won't mention the organization, but they received $5 million to train Latinas, to teach them literacy skills. They brought computers and they trained them. They got them from a 2nd grade reading level up to an 8th grade reading level. But this woman was very honest with me. She says, I know I cannot place those women in any jobs. But we enroll those women in those programs. We put them through this year-long program, knowing that at the end there was going to be no job placement. So again, who's benefiting? You know, we're creating an industry, but who's benefiting from that industry?
Well, unless you can get a job with America Works, of course. What it seems to me that you are both saying, and several people are saying here, is that there is a certain kind of way in which we're all fooling ourselves. Because the solution we've been told over and over again is that people on welfare have to get to work, and it just all we have to do is sort of help them get to work. And you're saying that's not going to happen.
One of the things we're forgetting is that corporate downsizing is a way of life. The big phrase today is that welfare is a way of life. But that is a way to make us not look at the fact that all these problems in the job market, I like to call that corporate downsizing as a way of life, to make that comparison and to make the point about where the real problem is. No jobs and too much poverty.
I think that Clinton's reform package, and that was picking up on this, I think it's real important that they haven't looked at what I call the center of gravity or the average experiences of welfare women in the way that we work toward getting off welfare. We have our own welfare reform that everybody, nearly everybody, puts into operation. That is strategies to get off welfare. That is not the basis of the welfare reform package. Nor are they looking at community-based organizations, religious organizations, and programs that do work and do support welfare mothers, do support people on public assistance in our communities that help people move from point A to point B. One of the programs I worked with for a long time, now defunct because of lack of resources, was the Sisterhood of Black Single Mothers. It's located in central Brooklyn. We used to meet different kinds of women, some on public assistance, some not on public assistance. We gave each other support, we gave each other help, and moving off and how personal strategies were making change. That organization doesn't have the resources to continue its work. There are, in every community, there are people working on this problem that have solutions that work. It's Clinton, the political pundits do not use those as the basis of their analysis. They use moral judgments, they use myth, they use the worst case scenario. They find, like the newspaper reporting on the women in Chicago, 2 black women, between them they had a dozen or so kids. They show them on the evening news 3 and 4 times. That's the case scenario they use. So when you have that as the basis of your notion of reform, of course they come up with something that is ill-conceived and limited.
Well, there is a debate amongst the so-called reformers. Some want to emphasize jobs. Others want to emphasize reforming the welfare recipients themselves. You know, this is true, and we know that. I want to bring it up, and I want to get your point of view. That a lot of the emphasis is, how do we stop people from having babies out of wedlock? How do we get women who are single mothers to get married? This is the emphasis.
But Barbara, those are not the community-based, that's not the spirit in the community-based organizations that are making change. Those are people talking
No, we're talking about the...
Yeah, and again, I'm saying because that analysis is not the analysis that you can use. And I think that we have to make, I think there's a conversation, and we had it in the sisterhood. You can have a conversation on a personal level with someone about their decisions, and, well, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? About their personal decisions, but that cannot be the basis of public policy. And I'm saying that this is why the notion of reform is skewed, and that's why it will not work.
Yeah,
there is this whole set of people who call themselves welfare reformers, who I term the behavior modification welfare reformers. And they have a real vested interest in portraying women who receive welfare in a category over here and women who work in a category over here. And the truth is that women who happen to be receiving welfare today may not be receiving welfare tomorrow because they found a job. Maybe it's only a temporary job, maybe it's a low-wage job, and God forbid one of the children should become sick and there's no health benefits. There's a circulating pool of women who may receive public assistance at one time or who may be in a very economically unstable job at another time. So women who receive welfare today are the tip of the iceberg, and truly the larger chunk of ice that sits under the water are the women who have a job for today, but who may be laid off, or whose factory may close, or because a woman doesn't speak English or doesn't have a high school education, is not sure that she'll have her job next week. And I wanted to add that the people who promote behavior modification welfare reform are also very interested in promoting the welfare mother as this insidious, society-destroying force. And they inform the welfare debate with many, many old stereotypes about African-American women and Latinas, because it's the behavior modification welfare reformers who want to raise racist stereotypes again. They know they can't say it anymore in public. So instead of saying the black woman or the Latino woman, instead of saying that our women are immoral and promiscuous and don't want any men, now they'll use the word welfare mother or the welfare queen. And so the behavior modification welfare reformers, the ones who want sanctions instead of education or job training, are going to press again and again the vision of the woman on welfare as this old racist stereotype of the African American or the Latino woman.
And so you're saying, in a way, we're even making a mistake to talk about welfare recipients, so we're really talking about a problem that's widespread. We're talking about poverty among many women and so on. And that you've been trying to get a word in here.
The thing that I'm trying to understand is that why is it that because I'm on welfare, it gives somebody the right to try to make choices for me? I don't need anyone to tell me when I should have a kid, by who I should have a kid, and how many kids I should have. I don't need anyone to tell me, no, I can't be a lawyer, I should be a secretary. I don't need anyone to tell me, no, I can't go to college, you have to do that. I don't understand why is anybody asking me why I had 3 children. That's nobody's business. And I feel that people, when they realize other people on welfare, they step over that boundary, and that's nobody's business, because what I do in my bedroom is my business, and I don't care if you're the president, okay? I don't care how much money you make. And that's the problem with society. They're so damn nosy, worrying about what we're doing. They're not worrying about what they're doing. And I don't feel that's like me asking you, well, why do you decide to have 2 children? I mean, what right do I have? That's your choice. Whether you're with a man, whether you are married, whether you're divorced, whether what happened, that's your life. And I don't feel that they should. I don't need for someone to tell me how I should behave. I know how to behave. I know when to respect, when to speak, when not to. And I don't. And that's what they're trying to do. They're always trying to control women. They're always trying to first control them, or now we're being fingerprinted. It's always trying to control, and that's nobody's business if we choose to have 2 children or not. I feel that right there, like they're violating me. I mean, when you go down to the welfare, they ask you, do you have any money in your pocket? What is it their business if I have $5, $10, $100? That's not, do you have any jewelry? Do you have a bank account? Would you like it if I come up to you? Do you have any jewelry? I mean, that's right there. That's insulting. That's degrading. And I don't feel that they have any rights.
We are at a point in the debate where it's being taken. Public policy is considered now to extend to these issues of personal life. And one of the most interesting things I think that's being discussed in some of the states is efforts to force women on welfare to get married. Okay. And I'd like to, you want to comment on that?
No, I just think that you cannot legislate morality. And I think that people are forcing people into legislating morality. I think that there's a double standard. If a black woman has a child out of wedlock, she's considered and if somebody else has a child out of wedlock, then it's fancy and it's nice. When you look at the Hollywood crowd that have all these babies, okay, and it is publicized, it is a wonderful thing that they have a child out of wedlock, yet if a minority person has out of wedlock, that's an immoral person. And I think that what we need to do as women is to really set a standard which says that there is only one standard for all women. If it's immoral for a black woman to have a child out of wedlock, it's immoral for a white woman to have a child out of wedlock. But in fact, we're all in poverty, whether we're white or whether we're black women. And I think to force or to frame the welfare reform in that context without giving choices to women, because if my choice is to stay home and nurture and raise my kids, I think that the government should support me in doing that. If my choice is to go out and work and have somebody take care of my kid, then the society should have child care that is nurturing and that is caring so that I can be productive in giving the tax dollars. But apart from that, there's got to be a circular way of making it work for all women who have children and want to do that.
Let's talk about these government attempts to change people's private lives. And I'm interested, Martha, you are a lawyer. You've looked into the civil rights aspects of this. What about attempts to get women who are welfare recipients to get married? Is that a solution, and is this even something we can legally do to people?
Well, I think it's a big question under the Constitution. What's happening is that in the sort of welfare, which is what you're talking about, and then also in something called the child exclusion, which is eliminating benefits for children born while their mothers are receiving AFDC, is that there's an effort to use government benefits to try to coerce women into certain behaviors. It's not clear, first of all, that that's going to work at all, whether that's a good strategy.
What if you marry a guy and he doesn't have any money?
Right, exactly. And more two-parent families are poor. This gets back to what we began with, is that the real issue is jobs, not family structure. And certainly we know many single women who are not on AFDC. It really doesn't relate to family structure so much as the availability of jobs and the choices that people make and the skills that they have to take advantage of that.
So this is in New Jersey and other states. They're trying to pressure women to getting married.
Issue here, and this is one of the ways that Clinton and others have framed the welfare reform debate, is to isolate it, and particularly to isolate women's experience, and I'm speaking specifically about the African American women's experience, from the experience of African American men. And we know that African American men, from the data, are going through an economic depression, particularly those who are poor. They do not have work. So when people suggest that marriage will be a solution, they are ignoring that part of the other part of the experience that is going on in the African American community and other communities, not
Other
just
communities.
that, in the Rust Belt, in other kinds of communities, certainly on reservations and other ethnic and people of color communities, immigrant communities, where the men don't have the resources. So marriage is not the solution. In addition to, I think, a clear violation of our rights to marry or not marry. And also, having been on welfare with a husband, welfare has a way of undermining, especially for black families, black marriages, those marriages, by denying benefits to both the man and woman. This is when I was on in the early 70s. My husband went down to welfare to try to get it for both of us, and he did not get anything. And he couldn't get a job. You see, so that they do undermine.
So we're saying that this is,
They undermine
this is
even
another,
poor two-parent
this is another direction that reform isn't going to work. Yes.
The Clinton administration has proposed expanding AFDC to include two-parent families. So I think that's one thing that's been proposed that is good.
So that was-
and will be a benefit to.
But there's something to be remembered here about the Clinton administration thus far, and that it has a consistent pattern of putting an issue and half-thought proposals on the floor to generate conversation and frenzy and what have you, and then somehow something comes out of it in the end. During the campaign process of the Clinton administration, you saw a very sophisticated public relations ploy of bringing people in from various professions and bringing them to the table to discuss something. That has not happened on something as crucial as an issue of this. And not to get off the subject, but we need to be able to look at patterns of behavior for those who are taking advantage and stand to gain, from these decisions. And I think as women, we need to be forthright and accurate about making sure that the consequence is brought up front. Because we can't get answers to priorities with regards to people's positions and their determinations, but we have to be, vigilant about showing and demonstrating what the ramifications of these decisions
are. We have to change the whole debate. I think we need to get back to something that Annette said, which said, who has the right to tell you what you do and how many children you have? I think we need to change the debate. We need to get it back to what is it that families need to survive? Whether you are a single mother with no husband or with 3 kids or 10 kids, what is it that families need in this country to survive? We need to talk about the debate around health care. We need to talk about child care. We need to talk about housing. We need to talk about how our kids are not being educated.
Basic needs.
We need to talk about college students. What are some of the things that they need? What are the resources that families need to raise children in this society? Once you raise the debate to that level, you get away from that attack and rebuttal, because we'll always be talking about and focusing in on the behaviors of people that we don't like.
How are we, let's begin to think positively, because we don't have too much more time left here. It's how do we imagine bringing women together, from women of different races, different social classes, different educational backgrounds, who do have some common core experience in struggling to raise their children and so forth. Do we have some a vision of a strategy of how people are going to come together and raise the issue as you're putting it, Doris, which is how are families going to survive, not how do we modify the behavior, as Nina put it, of some people whose behavior for some reason we've been told we shouldn't like, yeah?
I mean, one way to think about that is to realize that women on welfare, women who are working, who are poor, and more well-off women all share a caregiving crisis today. That nobody is able to manage their work and family life very well, and that whether you're rich enough to buy daycare services or not, everyone is suffering the burdens of this and the stress attached to it, the negative impact on the family, on children, especially if you're poor and don't have the resources to take care of your family. We might begin to think about doing things about that. We've already started a little bit. We have some child care, it's not very good. We have some family and medical leave, which recognizes that people have to go home and take care of their kids under certain conditions. We have flex time on the job. We're nibbling around this issue of the caregiving crisis. But on a financial level, we're not dealing it very well. We're attacking welfare mothers, and that attack on welfare mothers is really an attack on all women because we're suffering the same kind of caregiving crisis. And I think that in other Western industrialized countries, they have things called a family allowance, a children's allowance, which is given across the board, recognizing that it costs money to raise children, that society values children and wants to contribute, and that we might begin to, one, stop all this punitive welfare reform here, two, begin to improve AFDC while we're waiting for some kind of family allowance, while we're fighting for some kind of family allowance or children's allowance that would be given to all women across the board. And we wouldn't then just have a program for single mothers, which is kind of a sitting duck because of all the stigma that's attached to it. If we can integrate all the women together into one program, I think we'd be much better.
I think we'd have to work towards a family policy, which the United States goes around. Again, because if you know what it takes for a family to subsist and you subsidize anything above that, it would be all families who are in need that would be getting that subsidy. And I think if you talk about any kind of welfare reform, you have to talk about it in the context of the family and have a family policy which says this is what we will do for all Americans.
I want to turn to Allie because you are the chair of a very broad coalition of women's groups, feminist groups. I mean, what are the chances? Do you see this happening? Do you see women finding a common interest in these issues and coming together for some more genuine kind of welfare reform?
I think possibly. I wish I could say surely. If we don't get together, not much is going to happen. We're 53% of the country, and it is time that women did speak more forcibly. Most women are afraid of being aggressive. Most women are overawed, probably because of the physical strength of men. I think that, as much as anything else, has kept women from coming out fighting. But we have strange allies we haven't reached out to. For instance, the Right to Life group. I'd like to see them defend a principle of mothers going out into the workforce, being forced to. Some of the very conservative groups. It's going to be a very interesting debate. I'd like to see how they're going to justify saying that women should be forced to work, that children should not be given a standard of living no matter where they were or how they were born. I'm going to find that entertaining, if nothing else.
All right, we're talking about strategies. Where's real welfare reform going to come from? Doreen.
Just one second on this question you asked me. We now have 40 women's groups, major women's groups that have come together in New York City. It's a movement that is starting in other cities also because people are calling us up and asking us about it. We have various issues committees that are working on domestic violence and other kinds of aspects. We haven't really hit the problem on welfare reform, and we need to do that too. But this is a coalition of a lot of very diverse groups of different ethnic, different racial, different income levels, and it is working. We are working together, and we're beginning to care a lot about each other.
Where I sit is a little bit different. It's not a strategy that brings women together necessarily across boundaries, although I'm not opposed to that. But until there's really change in my community, which involves men and children living in a community, and I see that the work in grassroots work among community-based activists and community-based organizations. In Central Brooklyn, there's a loose network of people that work together concertedly on various issues. And as we continue to strategize around how we want to develop our community, I think that is also a way to begin to attack welfare reform. The isolation of welfare reform away from all of the kinds of issues that Doris raised, as well as how it situates how people live in a community that has historic and cultural roots and stuff, has to be addressed. And so I think on the one hand, there's a way that we can go out and look, and I've worked for years in national women's organizations, national women's coalitions. There's a way that those women's organizations, coalitions often miss the community. So I would like to see that connected up with, I also want to say, before we run out of time, that CUNY is a good place to start mobilization on both issues, on both ways, both in terms of being directed toward community, since CUNY is located in every community throughout the city, as well as we have different kinds of women. Some are professors, some are on welfare, And so this institution is a place also that can make a political impact.
Very good point. Doreen, you're a student, in fact, at CUNY,
Yes,
right?
and quickly, I just wanted to say two things. One of the things is, to me, I'm all for welfare reform, but I still believe in my heart that welfare reform should start at the top. They're attacking the bottom, they're attacking the middle. When you have a pie, you can't cut the middle of the pie first. You got to cut, you know. How can you attack the recipients, which is us? We don't make the laws, okay? And everything at the top stays the same, because then that cycle is still coming around. Another thing I would like to say is the 2-year program.
The Clinton proposal,
Right,
2 years and you're out.
It's great. Don't get me wrong. I'm very grateful to be in college and have welfare somewhat support me. But what can you get with an associate's degree? Most people that end up with an associate's degree end back up on welfare because they can't find a job. Now,
the 2 years is not
in the minority areas where the blacks and the Latinos live, the welfare centers have people, and I'm not saying that anyone is uneducated, but these people were like me. They were forced to work from PWP or whatever, so they don't know the laws. I have a college work-study job, and I was just cut off for $5 an hour and 2 hours a day. So that's $50 a week because a person didn't know the law. The law states since 1981 that you can't mess with a student for TAP, Pell, or CWS if you're on welfare. But a lot of people are uninformed because the lady that does this, she's like, well, I'm sorry, I'm just working here for PWP, for my welfare check. So they go to 6th cycle again, and it keeps going around and around.
So you'd start welfare reform by having some of the low-level people in the bureaucracy know the law, know what they're doing.
These people were never trained. They don't have degrees. How can you have them help us, who's misinformed, and we don't have degrees?
But during the 70s and the 80s, during the 70s and the 80s, you had a cycle, because it's a governmental piece, it's a numbers game, you had a cycle in which people were cut off for whatever the excuses were, so that the stats would be appropriate. See, so that consistent harassment and dehumanizing process that people go through, that breaks the spirit. And to break the spirit is to someone's advantage. And to dignify it as being racist, to say that it is a system and it is logical, it is more ignorant, more lazy, and more convenient to perpetuate a quality of life for some and denial of quality for others. But I
guess what we have to remember, you're right. We're talking about demoralization, people's spirit being broken by the way they're treated. But at some point, in the past, not that far in the past, women, welfare recipients, community people did organize to expand welfare rights. Francis, you have written about this. How did they do it, and is that a possibility today? Is that a direction for welfare reform that doesn't start from the top?
Well, first we have to take account of the way everything is combining to break the spirit, to degrade poor women, women on welfare. The Clinton proposals are a form of degradation. Letting welfare grants become so low that life on welfare is demeaning, that's a form of degradation. The harassment that women describe, that Doreen describes, is a form of degradation. All of this saps the political strength of poor women. But there have been times in the past when women have overcome that, when they've begun to come together and redefine who they were, what their rights were, and recognize that what they had in common, and recognize who their allies are. And one of the reasons that I think that the support of women elsewhere, women in other walks of life, women's organizations, community advocacy groups, is important, is that it helps give poor women a sense of strength and possibility and hope, because people come together and they see themselves differently and they begin to fight for their rights when they have hope. So one of the reasons we're important is because we're a kind of political resource for poor women trying to both redefine who they are and what their rights are, and make the United States a more humane society for them, their children, and for others who are in the same boat.
But we should be realistic because the women's movement, the middle-class women's movement, the so-called feminist movement, has not been a supporter of welfare women or welfare issues. And even as recently as the 1988 legislation, and in each state, and I've studied this in detail, we had no support for changes for education, higher education, going to college, from the women's movement, from any of the traditional women's organizations, and surprisingly not from labor unions. So if we're talking about coalition and crossing classes and crossing ethnic and racial groups, we have to be realistic about that. It's going to take a lot more energy than sitting around here talking about it, because historically there is a division, and there's a division among women who are in movement politics. Generally speaking, women of color and lower income women are in community activist groups and are interested in reform from the community level, just as Barbara has indicated. And in the feminist movement and upper middle class organizations, as Ellie has indicated openly, those groups have not been concerned with welfare women and the issues of welfare women. And I think we have to be realistic about that.
I think there are a number of us that are working to change that, and I think that certainly as the current debate is going forward, National Organization for Women, now Legal Defense Fund, Wider Opportunities for Women, National Women's Law Center, Women's Legal Defense Fund, a number of groups have formed coalitions and been in contact with welfare recipient groups to try to bring some of the information that welfare recipients have and that women's groups have to the administration so that we can play a part in changing the focus of the debate. So I think you're right historically. I think that there are a lot of us that are working to change that this round, and I think that with some success, I hope.
I was going to say that if it's isolated, you see, from the kinds of conditions that exist with poor men and exist in communities around issues of violence and et cetera, it becomes, again, something where it becomes more narrow in terms of people's interests. And not only do women's groups, as you were suggesting, they come together around this issue, but then there are other groups who are trying to say, well, let's look at something much broader than simply women coming together. We have to also look at how we are going to live in those communities as men, women, and children. There is where you really do get the breakdown where women's groups don't want to talk about issues of violence that affect high school students, male and female. As a parent, that becomes a non-women's issue.
But I think
male unemployment becomes a non-women's issue.
Here, though, I think,
but for women,
Barbara?
especially, excuse me a second, especially for black women organizing in the community, these are women's issues. Exactly. So our conflict with the women's movement is that around those issues.
I think in the last little bit of time, we just have 3 minutes, I think we have to, this is our chance to focus on what would be real welfare reform. And I want to throw this in part to some of you who are advocates who are working for it, and some of you who are currently welfare recipients, for what should be done, and not just what would be a dream, but strategically how would you put people together in coalitions to make it happen. Andrea?
I feel that we as women stop discriminating against our own selves and become more supportive of each other. Regardless that I'm on welfare, that you got a good job. Be supportive to me and I be supportive to you, because we are women. We cause a lot of friction within our own selves, and that's pushing us back. Women have come a long way, baby, but we're pushing our own selves back. And all of us as women know behind every great man is a greater woman. So we're defeating all the purposes that we have been fighting for as women, and I feel that it has a lot to do with it. An awful lot at making changes to support ourselves. I'm a mother, you're a mother, but because I'm on public assistance and because you may have a degree, doesn't make us no different. We're still a woman. We're women, and be supportive.
Well, I think we have to stop now. I think we can come about this from many approaches as women and the point of view of children too. And I hope this sparks real debate on welfare reform.